coming together for COVID recovery to rebuild our economy, not even considering an irresponsible independence referendum. And I would very much welcome his and other political parties if they showed a willingness to come together to work on how we can strengthen our union. I'd welcome that.
Ian Murray.
As Starmer has said throughout this campaign, we need to unite the country to deal with the global pandemic. Talking of honesty, integrity and truth, can the Secretary of State take this opportunity to apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for his "let the bodies pile high" comment when so many have lost loved ones due to COVID, over 800 deaths in my city of Edinburgh alone? And while he is apologising, perhaps he can tell us, if the Prime Minister has nothing to hide, who funded the refurbishment of Downing Street flat? And does he think that endemic sleaze in his government, with continual questions about the personal conduct and integrity of the PM, strengthens or weakens the union?
Secretary of State.
Well, I mean, what I'd say to him on the bodies remark is that in every conversation I've had with the Prime Minister in the last year, his desire at all levels has been to save lives and protect the NHS. And I have, in many conversations, both in Cabinet committees, Cabinet and in private, I have no recollection of him being anything other than totally focused on saving lives and protecting the NHS. And he's been entirely focused on this pandemic, his pandemic all the way through. He hasn't been distracted, as others have. The nationalist Nicola Sturgeon admitting she took her eye off the ball. He hasn't taken his eye off the ball. He's been focused on the pandemic. He's tackled vaccines and the programme, and he now wants to lead our economic recovery. And those are the things that we should hold him to account for. Those are the things that strengthen the United Kingdom.
Right, let's go to John Lamont. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been much reckless chat from SNP politicians about creating a hard border between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, my constituents in the Scottish border want to see the threat of a border and indeed the threat of another referendum removed. So does the Minister agree with me that the voters of Scotland have an opportunity to remove that threat next week in the Scottish elections by depriving the SNP of a majority, and that the best way of doing that is by voting Scottish Conservative?
Bit of a toughie.
You won't be surprised, Mr. Speaker, that I do agree with my honourable friend. And I would note with some astonishment, Mr. Speaker, the comments of the South of Scotland MSP Emma Harper that a border would be a good way of creating jobs, despite the fact that 60% of our trade is with the rest of the UK. And all I would say is if the SNP think that a border is such a good idea for jobs, I'm surprised they don't want to go the whole hog and propose building a wall.
Right, let's go to SNP spokesperson, Mary Black. Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Particularly as we rebuild after COVID, we have an opportunity and a need to make radically different economic choices. Now, after a week of troublesome allegations from the government and the Prime Minister, it should be of no surprise that many in Scotland want to take a different, independent path to that of this government. So if that request is reflected in the upcoming Scottish Government elections and a majority of pro-independence MSPs are elected, will he and his government respect that as a mandate for a second independence referendum?
State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the first thing I'd say is let's not take the outcome of the election for granted at this stage. And let's recognise that the focus for Scotland has to be on pandemic recovery. We've saved lives through the vaccine procurement. It's now time to save livelihoods and to rebuild as one United Kingdom.
Let's go back to Mary Black. Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear an answer to my question there. You see, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives was asked multiple times on recent media what would be the democratic path for Scotland to an independence referendum, and he couldn't answer the question. So can the Minister tell us what the path is?
State.
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady that in 2014 there was a referendum. It was many years since the question had been asked, and that was with the consent of both Scotland's governments and all the main political parties. And I'm glad to say that in Scotland, people shared my opinion in 2014 and consented to continue being members of the United Kingdom.
Right. Let us go to Pete Wishart. Pete.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's only one surefire way for the union to be strengthened in the next week, and that's to get the Prime Minister to Scotland and on the campaign trail. The Secretary of State surely knows that there will be throngs of happy Scots rejoicing in his sleaze-free presence, helping the Electoral Commission with their inquiries, sharing their anecdotes about bodies piled high on the street. What could possibly go wrong for the Scottish Tories? So can the Secretary of State and I start working on the itinerary? Surely Scotland deserves to see its Prime Minister before he inevitably has to resign.
Secretary of State.
Well, the Prime Minister's diary is not my, as you well know, is not my concern, and he certainly won't be resigning. And I come back to the point I made earlier. In all my discussions with him, his passion for strengthening the United Kingdom burns very bright indeed.
David Lynn, number 9. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government's approach to welfare is to recognise the value and importance of work, making work pay and supporting people into work, whilst giving extra help to the most vulnerable in society. On this basis, we consider that a universal basic income is fundamentally the wrong approach.
David Lynn.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to the Minister for that reply, and I know that he's very committed to devolution and the respect agenda, and he would want to take very seriously the outcome of the result of the election in Scotland. Now, given that all of the main parties in Scotland have indicated support for trialling the concept of UBI, except the Conservatives, that represents 80% of Scottish voters, would he accept that if indeed those parties are elected in the next Parliament, there is a mandate and it would just be respecting devolution to go ahead with those trials?
Well, I would make 2 points in response to the Honourable Gentleman. The first is that if he looks around the world where UBI has been trialled, in Finland and Canada, for example, it's not been a success. And indeed in Finland, the Finance Minister has scrapped it and is instead looking along something along the lines of our universal credit system. The second point I would make to the Honourable Gentleman is that the Scottish Government already has substantial powers over welfare.
Let's go to Christine Jardine. Christine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. While I share the Honourable Member for Glasgow East's determination that universal basic income is the way ahead and his disappointment that it's not being trialled in Scotland, does the Secretary of State share my disappointment that the SNP government at Holyrood was not able to get its processes in shape in time to be able to adopt the powers over welfare in the 2016 Scotland Act, which may have given them more influence over the situation?
Minister.
Well, I certainly agree with the Honourable Lady's point. The Scottish Government still has much to do to unlock the full potential of the powers devolved to it in the Scotland Act 2016. We are committed to working closely with them to allow them to implement those powers. But it does strike me that the separatists are always quick to demand more powers or more money to shift the blame away from their failures in office on delivering for the issues that matter to the people of Scotland.
We now have a substantive question. Minister Dewey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I will answer questions 11 and 12 together. I have regular discussions with ministerial colleagues as well as industry stakeholders on the opportunities that COP26 offers across Scotland. The COP26 Devolved Administration Ministerial Group brings together the COP President, Territorial Secretaries of State and Devolved Administration Ministers to support delivery of an inclusive and welcoming COP26 summit representative of the whole United Kingdom.
Let's go to John Howell. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the SNP government missed their own legal emissions targets, with source emissions in Scotland actually increasing by 1.5% in 2017-18. Does my honourable friend agree that as we approach the crucial COP26 summit in Glasgow later this year, the Scottish people deserve a government that is 100% focused on a green recovery, not another divisive independence referendum?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure you'll agree it's not for me to answer to the failings of the Scottish Government. However, I can assure my honourable friend that the UK Government is absolutely focused on achieving a green recovery plan as set out by the Prime Minister in his 10-point plan last year. This government is also focused on safeguarding the Union, and I agree with my honourable friend that a divisive referendum on Scotland's separation from the UK at this time would be an irresponsible distraction from the necessary work required towards that green recovery.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the ambitious new target this government set last week to cut the UK's carbon emissions by 78% by 2035? And does my honourable friend agree that in the run-up to the crucial COP26 summit later this year, it is more important than ever for all parts of the UK to work together so we can meet this target, so we can build back better and greener from the pandemic?
Minister.
Again, I completely agree with my honourable friend. Our proposed world-leading target marks a decisive step towards net zero by 2050 and would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 78% by 2035 compared to 1990 levels. Through this year's COP26 summit, we will urge countries and companies around the world to join us in delivering net zero globally as we continue to work together across all parts of the UK to achieve our net zero ambitions and achieve a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality is the Minister should be embarrassed that renewable generators in Scotland face the highest locational grid charges in the whole of Europe. Ahead of COP26, we need to see a route to market for pumped storage hydro, for wave and tidal, go ahead for Acorn CCS and CFD for hydrogen. What capabilities the Scottish Office got to working with Cabinet colleagues to actually get these matters resolved?
I'll actually thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I share his enthusiasm for all things related to energy renewables. But he'll know as well as I do that by law transmission charging is a matter for Ofgem as the independent regulator. And Ofgem, I would imagine he'd be aware as well, is currently considering some aspects of transmission charging arrangements through its access and forward-looking charges review.
Let's go to Angela Crawley. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The SNP Scottish Government has committed to doubling its climate change justice fund. If re-elected next week, this is £24 million fund is used to help combat the effects of climate change in the global south while we tackle carbon emissions at home. In the year of COP26, will the UK Government follow Scotland's lead and commit to a comparable climate justice fund to help those affected by climate change?
I thank the honourable lady for her question. Not only will we commit to a comparable financial commitment, the recent spending review committed to spend £12 billion on green measures to support the 10-point plan and boost the UK's global leadership on green infrastructure and technologies, not just ahead of COP26 this year, but beyond as well.
Substantive question to Minister Stewart.
The United Kingdom is and will remain a research superpower with R&D spending at the highest level for 4 decades. The Government has committed to invest nearly £15 billion in research and development in 2021-22, much of which will be used to fund the work being led by our world-class universities.
Let's go to Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Thank you. But both Aberdeen and St Andrews universities stand to lose £2.5 million each as a result of ODA cuts. Among the ongoing projects at risk at Aberdeen is a £1.8 million research initiative into the spread of infectious diseases between rodents and humans. Given that we've recently been reminded of the importance of long-term, well-funded research in responding to a global crisis, what steps are being taken to ensure that these cuts do not impair Scotland's ability to respond to future crises?
Well, the first point I'd make to the honourable gentleman is I'm always willing to discuss individual programmes with specific universities, and I've done that through the honourable lady, the member for North East Fife, in the case of St Andrews. But the second point I'd make is all the universities he has listed have benefited from significant investments, either directly through UKRI or through our city and regional growth deal programmes, looking at R&D into issues like clean energy and sustainable farming.
We now come to Shadow Minister Chris Hummel.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. It's strange, Mr. Speaker, because University Scotland says that the ODA funding is unprecedented and egregious, and yet the Minister stands at the dispatch box and says it's okay because they get funding from other sources. University Scotland say that this amounts to a 70% cut in overseas funding of development for projects across universities in Scotland. So can the Minister explain how these cuts are reconciled with the Conservative government's idea of their post-Brexit ambition to build a global Britain?
Well, as I said in response to his honourable friend, I'm more than happy to discuss individual programmes with the universities concerned. But if you look at R&D investment from this government in the round, it is significantly up. Scottish universities are punching above their weight in securing a share of that.
We now have a substantive question to the Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 17 and 18 together. The defence industry in Scotland is strong, thanks to sustained UK government spending. My department has a close, positive relationship with the industry and the UK Armed Forces in Scotland, including on the implementation of the recent Integrated Review, Defence Command Paper and the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy.
Let's go to Mark Menzies. Mark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Shared expertise and infrastructure is key to supporting jobs across the United Kingdom, such as at Wharton in my constituency and those north of the border at BAE Systems site at Clyde. What estimates does my right honourable friend make of the positive impact the UK government's defence manufacturing has on job opportunities for the people of Scotland?
Well, I'd say to my honourable friend, the Royal Navy shipbuilding programme will provide a pipeline of work and sustain valuable jobs and skills for shipyards around the United Kingdom, including those in Scotland, being Rosyth and the Clyde, which are they're currently constructing the new frigate fleets. The Ministry of Defence has spent £2.7 billion with Scottish industry in 2019 and 2020 alone, and that has supported 12,400 jobs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Integrated Review published last month made clear that our strongest asset is the capabilities, the expertise and the skills we have across the United Kingdom. But would my right honourable friend agree with me that it is that same expertise and skills shared across the country that has enabled us to spend billions of pounds over the next decade on shipbuilding in Scotland?
Sir. Yes, Mr Speaker, I will absolutely agree with my honourable friend. Wholeheartedly, we saw a fine example of Scotland's contribution to the UK's defences this week with the deployment of our new aircraft carrier strike group. And that was built in yards around the United Kingdom, but it was constructed in Scotland, and Her Majesty's ship Queen Elizabeth will fly the flag for global Britain right around the world.
We have a substantive question to Minister Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last month's budget provides continued UK-wide support and security to manage the ongoing impacts of COVID-19. 1 in 3 jobs in Scotland has been supported by the UK Government's employment support package. Scottish businesses have benefited from more than £3.4 billion of loans and support, and we have also provided a much-needed boost to the Scottish tourism and hospitality sector with our UK-wide extension of VAT reduction.
Right, let's go to Sally Ann Hart. Sally Ann.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scotland's Auditor-General recently said that the Scottish Government had received an extra £9.7 billion from the UK Government during 2020 to 2021 to tackle COVID, yet had only made £7 billion worth of spending announcement in response to the pandemic up to the end of 2020. The Auditor-General said that this left £2.7 billion unallocated. And does my honourable friend agree that this highlights the need for transparency and scrutiny of Scottish Government spending, as people in Scotland have a right to know how much money to help Scotland deal with the pandemic is being spent?
Thank you. My honourable friend is right to draw the House's attention to this alarming finding. People in Scotland want to know that the money that this government has provided is reaching them and their businesses. And it is of great concern that Audit Scotland has identified this shortfall. I absolutely agree that this must be given the maximum transparency.
Robin Miller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We stand on the edge... Sorry? I'm sorry. Question 20, please, Mr Speaker.
I regularly discuss opportunities for Scotland arising from the signing of trade deals with my Cabinet colleagues. This government has already struck deals with 67 countries around the world worth £218 billion a year, including with Canada, Japan and Singapore, and with many more to come. This will create new markets for Scotland's exporters, including our world-leading food and drink sector.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A new free trade agreement with Australia is now in sight for the UK. Does my right honourable friend agree that this is a tremendous opportunity for exporters of agricultural products and indeed food and drink producers across Scotland and Wales?
My right honourable friend is right about that, and he's right to welcome the breakthroughs over the past few days with the Australian government. Businesses in Scotland exported goods worth over £352 million to Australia in 2019, and reducing tariff barriers for our world-class food and drink industry could bolster Scotch whisky exports to Australia. As the Secretary of State for International Trade made clear at the weekend, this deal will be based on fair competition, maintaining our high standards, and providing exciting opportunities for British products.
Right, we have a substantive question to Minister Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government works with the Scottish Government on a daily basis on a range of constitutional matters, including delivering on our devolution commitments through the Scotland Act Order programme. I would have thought, Mr. Speaker, that a more interesting question would have been to ask what discussions his new party has had with the First Minister on an unnecessary and divisive further referendum and separation.
Let's go up to Neil Hanby. Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When Scotland opens negotiations for independence following the election of a supermajority on the 6th of May, can I ask, will those talks be led by the Secretary of State or the Minister for the Union, should, of course, he still be in post by that time?
Minister.
Well, I must say to the Honourable Gentleman, he's being rather presumptuous about the outcome of the elections next week, so let's wait and see what the people of Scotland decide. I would have thought they will be more interested in keeping the protections of the pandemic in place, helping businesses recover, and helping children catch up on the education that they've missed over the last year.
That's the end of questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland. We're now going to come to the questions for the Prime Minister. I will first call the Prime Minister to answer the engagements question, and then I will call Andrea Jenkins to ask her supplementary. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the thoughts of members across the House are with the people of India. We're supporting India with vital medical equipment, and we will continue to work closely with the Indian authorities to determine what further help they may need. Mr. Speaker, I also welcome last week's Court of Appeal decision to overturn the convictions of 39 former sub-postmasters in the Horizon dispute, an appalling injustice. Sir Wyn Williams is leading an ongoing independent inquiry that will report this summer. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Let's go to Andrea Jenkins. Andrea. You're on mute, I think, Andrea.
What's going on, Sam?
Have you got the answer? Tell us more about PMQs. I'm sure the Prime Minister knows the answer. Prime Minister. You can't do it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try and come back. I'm going to go to Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his remarks about the humanitarian disaster we're witnessing in India? I know the UK has already committed some support, but given the scale and gravity of the disaster, I hope the Foreign Secretary will set out today what more the UK will do to help the Indian people in their hour of need. Can I also join the Prime Minister in his remarks about the Post Office case and ongoing injustice? And of course, today is International Workers' Memorial Day, and this day, this year, after all the sacrifices our frontline workers have made during the pandemic, it's even more poignant than usual. I join in solidarity with all those mourning loved ones today. Mr. Speaker, it was reported this week, including in the Daily Mail, the BBC and ITV, backed up by numerous sources, that at the end of October, the Prime Minister said he would rather have, and I quote, bodies pile high than implement another lockdown. Can the Prime Minister tell the House categorically, yes or no, did he make those remarks or remarks to that effect?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, and I think the right honourable gentleman is a lawyer, I'm given to understand. I think that if he's going to repeat allegations like that, he should come to this House and substantiate those allegations and say where he heard them and who exactly is supposed to have said those. Who exactly is supposed to have said those things, Mr. Speaker? Because what I certainly can tell him, and he asked about the October decisions, they were very bitter, very difficult decisions, as they would be for any Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, because no one wants to put this country into a lockdown with all the consequences that means for loss of education, for the damage to people's life chances, to the huge medical backlog that it entails. But it was thanks to that lockdown, the tough decision that we took, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the heroic efforts of the British people, that we have got through to this stage in the pandemic where we find ourselves rolling out our vaccine, where we've done 50% of the population, 25% of the adult population have now had 2 doses, Mr. Speaker. And lockdowns are miserable. Lockdowns are appalling things to have to do, but I have to say that I believe that we had absolutely no choice.
Keir Starmer.
Well, somebody here isn't telling the truth. The House will have heard the Prime Minister's answer, and I remind him the Ministerial Code says, and I quote, "Ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation." I'll leave it there for now. Turning to another issue, there'll be further on this, believe you me, who initially, and Prime Minister, initially is the key word here, who initially paid for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to misleading Parliament, he may recollect that it was only a few weeks ago that he said that he didn't oppose this government, this country staying in leaving the European Medicines Agency. The fact that he was then forced to retract and leaving the European Medicines Agency was absolutely invaluable for our vaccine rollout. And actually, it was just last week that he said that James Dyson was a personal friend of mine. A fact that James Dyson has corrected in the newspaper this morning. As for the latest stuff that he's bringing up, he should know that I paid for Downing Street refurbishment personally, Mr. Speaker, and I contrast it. Any further declaration that I have to make, I will, if any, I will be advised upon by Lord Guide. But if he talks about housing costs, Mr. Speaker, then the people of this country can make their own decision in just 8 days' time, because on average Labour councils charge you £93 more in Band D, the Conservative councils, and Liberal Democrat councils charge you £120 more. That, I think, is the issue. That, I think, is the issue upon which the British people would like him to focus.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, normally when people don't want to incriminate themselves, they go no comment. Let me ask this. Let's explore this a bit further, Prime Minister. Let's ask it a different way. Either, this is the initial invoice, Prime Minister, initial invoice, either the taxpayer paid the initial invoice, or it was the Conservative Party, or it was a private donor, or it was the Prime Minister. So I'm making it easy for the Prime Minister. It's now multiple choice. There are only 4 options. It should be easier than finding the chatty rat, Mr. Speaker. So I ask the Prime Minister again, who paid the initial invoice, Prime Minister, for the redecoration of the Prime Minister's flat, the initial invoice?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've given him the answer, and the answer is I have covered the costs, and I think most people will find it absolutely bizarre. And of course there's an electoral commission investigating this, and I can tell him that I've conformed in full with the code of conduct, with ministerial code, and officials have been have been advising me throughout this whole thing. But I think people will think it absolutely bizarre that he is focusing on this issue. When what people want to know is what plans the Labour government might have to improve the life of people in this country. And let me tell you, if he talks about housing again, we're helping people on the house. I'd rather not spend taxpayers' money, by the way, like the last Labour government, who spent £500,000 of taxpayers' money on the Downing Street flat. Yes, they did, tarting it up. I would much rather help people get on the property ladder, and it's this Conservative government that has built 244,000 homes in the last year, which is a record over 30 years. This is a government that gets on with delivering on the people's priorities while he continually raises, I think, issues that most people would find irrelevant to their concerns.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of priorities. What's he spending his time doing? This is a Prime Minister who, during the pandemic, was nipping out of meetings to choose wallpaper at £840 a roll. Just last week, he spent his time phoning journalists to moan about his old friend Dominic Cummings. And he's telling the civil service to find out who paid for the redecoration in his flat. The Cabinet Secretary has been asked to investigate who paid for the refurbishments in the flat. Why doesn't the Prime Minister just tell him? That would be the end of the investigation. Mr. Speaker, it's been widely reported that Lord Brownlow, who just happens to have been given a peerage by the Conservative Party, was asked to donate £58,000 to help repay for the cost of this refurbishment. Can the Prime Minister, if he's so keen to answer, confirm, did Lord Brownlow make that payment for that purpose?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered this question several times now, and the answer is that I have covered the costs. I have met the requirements that I've been obliged to meet in full, and when it comes to the taxpayer and the costs of Number 10 Downing Street, it was the previous Labour government. I think Tony Blair racked up a bill of £350,000, and I think what the people of this country want to see is minimising taxpayer expense. They want to see a government that's focused on their needs and delivering more homes for the people of this country and cutting council tax, which is what we're doing. And it's on that basis that I think people are going to judge our parties on May the 6th.
Keir Starmer.
Answer the question. That's what the public scream at their televisions every PMQs. Answer the question. The Prime Minister hasn't answered the question. He knows he hasn't answered the question. He never answers the question. The Prime Minister will be aware that he's required to declare any benefits that relate to his political activities, including loans or credit arrangements, within 28 days. 28 days, Prime Minister, yes. He will also know that any donation must be recorded in the register of ministers' interests, and that under the law any donation of over £500 to a political party must be registered and declared. So the rules are very clear. The Electoral Commission now think that there are reasonable grounds to suspect that an offence or offences may have occurred. That's incredibly serious. Can the Prime Minister tell the House, does he believe that any rules or laws have been broken in relation to the refurbishment of the Prime Minister's flat?
Prime Minister.
No, I don't, Mr. Speaker. What I believe has been strained to breaking point is the credulity of the public. He has half an hour every week to put serious and sensible questions to me about the state of the pandemic, about the vaccine rollout, about what we're doing to support our NHS, about what we're doing to fight crime, about what we're doing to bounce back from this pandemic, about the economic recovery, about jobs for the people of this country. And he goes on and on, Mr. Speaker, about wallpaper when, as I've told him umpteen times now, I paid for it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Prime Minister of the Nolan Principles, which are meant to govern the behaviour of those in public office? They're these: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. Instead, what do we get from this Prime Minister and this Conservative government? Dodgy contracts, jobs for their mates, and cash for access. And who's at the heart of it? The Prime Minister, Major Sleaze, sitting there. Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, he talks about priorities. Crime is going up. NHS waiting lists are at record levels, and millions of people are worried about their jobs, including Liberty Steel. Mr. Speaker, don't the British people deserve a Prime Minister they can trust and a government that isn't mired in sleaze, cronyism and scandal?
Mr. Speaker, last week he came to this chamber and he attacked me for talking to James Dyson about ventilators, where we're now sending ventilators to help the people of India. And the following day, Mr. Speaker, the Labour front bench said that any Prime Minister in my position would have done exactly the same thing. it wasn't only a few months ago that they were actually attacking Kate Bingham, as saying she was a crony when she helped to set up the vaccine task force that delivered millions of vaccines for the people of this country, Mr. Speaker, and helping us to get out of the pandemic. This is a government that is getting on with delivering on the people's priorities. We're rolling out many more nurses, 10,000 more nurses in the NHS now than there were this time last year, 8,771 more police officers on our streets now than there were when I was elected, including tougher sentences, Mr. Speaker, for serious sexual and violent criminals, which he opposed, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on, and by the way, I forgot to mention it. Last night, our friends in the European Union voted to approve our Brexit deal, which he opposed. Which enables us not just to take back control of our borders, Mr. Speaker, but to deliver free, which it does, which he fervently opposed, enabling us, amongst other things, to deal with such threats as the European Super League, Mr. Speaker, but it enables us to deliver free ports in places like Teesside, and above all, taking back control of our country has allowed us to deliver the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, as he well knows, Mr. Speaker, which would not have been possible if we'd stayed in the European Medicines Agency, which he voted for. Mr. Speaker, week after week, the people of this country can see the difference between a Labour Party that twists and turns with the wind, that thinks of nothing except playing political games, whereas this party gets on with delivering on the people's priorities, and I hope that people will vote Conservative on May the 6th.
Let's see if we can calm it down a little. Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is indeed a world leader in COVID-19 vaccination. May I thank the Prime Minister for the swift action he has taken to deliver this for our country. And will the Prime Minister join me in thanking the many local volunteers, such as Kirsty Griffith, who has been volunteering at the Marlow Vaccine Centre, and Guy Hullis and Paul Bass, who have been volunteering alongside the Denham Community Health. And thank you for the vaccine rollout in South Bucks.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend should thank everybody involved, and it's been a fantastic national effort led by the NHS, led overwhelmingly by GPs, but also by many others, by local council officers, officials, by the army, by many others, and of course huge numbers of volunteers in her constituency and elsewhere. And I thank Kirsty Griffiths, Guy Hollis and Paul Bass very much for everything they've done.
Let's go to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition over the humanitarian crisis in India and the injustice over the Horizon issue at the Post Office. Mr. Speaker, over 127,000 people have died from COVID in the United Kingdom. People have lost their mothers and fathers, their grandparents and even their children. NHS staff have given their all, fighting to keep people alive. That's why so many people find the Prime Minister's remark that he would rather let their bodies pile high in their thousands than go into lockdown utterly sickening. The BBC and ITV have multiple sources confirming that this is what the Prime Minister said. People are willing to go under oath, Mr. Speaker, confirming that the Prime Minister said these exact words, under oath, Mr. Speaker. Now, parliamentary rules stop me from saying that the Prime Minister has repeatedly lied to the public over the last week. But can I ask the question, are you a liar, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I leave it to you to judge whether the honourable gentleman's remarks were in order. But what I will say to him is that...
unfortunately, we're in order, but we're not savoury and not what we would expect.
I'm grateful to you, Mr. Speaker. But what I would say to the right honourable gentleman is that if he is going to relay that kind of quotation, it is up to him in a place like Parliament to produce the author. The person who claims to have heard it, because I can't find them. He says that they're willing to go on oath. Perhaps they're sitting somewhere in this building. I rather doubt it, because I didn't say those words. What I do believe is that a lockdown is a miserable thing. and I did everything I could to try to protect the British public throughout the pandemic, to protect them from lockdowns, but also to protect them from disease. And he's right to draw attention to the wretched toll that COVID has brought. And we grieve. I know the whole House grieves for every family that has lost a loved one. It has been a horrendous time. But it is thanks to that lockdown and the vaccine rollout, combined with the vaccine rollout, that we're making the progress we are. And I may say we're making progress across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Let's go back to Ian Blackford. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, it's the Prime Minister's behaviour which is not in order. This is a Prime Minister who is up to his neck in a swamp of Tory sleaze. We've seen contracts for cronies, texts for tax breaks, and cash for curtains. The Prime Minister has dodged these questions all week, and he's dodged them again today. But these questions simply are not going to go away. So when exactly was money funneled through Tory HQ into his personal bank account? When did he pay back this money? Was it an interest-free loan? And who is the donor or donors who originally funded it? Is the Prime Minister aware that if he continues to fail to answer these questions, that the Electoral Commission has the powers to prosecute him? Will the Prime Minister publish these details today, or is he going to wait until the police come knocking at his door?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, I look forward to what the Electoral Commission has to say, but I can tell him that for the rest of it, he's talking complete nonsense. And the only thing I will say is that it is thanks to our investment in policing that we're going to have another 20,000 more officers on the street of the streets of our country, and that is a fantastic thing. And we will be making sure that gets through to Scotland as well. What we want to see is a Scottish nationalist government stop obsessing about breaking up our country, which is all they can think about and talk about tackling crime and using that investment to fight crime, which is, I think, what the people of Scotland want to see.
Gary Shamrock.
If the Prime Minister was to walk down Bristol Road South in Longbridge today, he would see a small army of JCB diggers levelling out the old MG Rover Westworks site to provide one of the biggest levelling up projects locally, with 5,000 extra jobs at an industrial site. But what people want to see too is a regeneration of Northfield High Street with a proper plan and money on the table. And so does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need people like Andy Street's driven and energetic mayors delivering for the West Midlands, working with me and local Conservative councillors to deliver on this plan? Because after all, Mr. Speaker, teamwork makes the dream work.
Mr. Speaker, I'm lost in admiration for what Andy Street is doing. He's a fantastic mayor of the West Midlands, and he's got a fantastic vision for transport, for jobs, for growth and recovery, and I hope everybody votes for Andy Street on May the 6th.
Right, let us go to Liz Saville-Roberts. Liz.
Diolch yn fawr, Lefarydd. I think it's worth repeating the Ministerial Code's 7 guiding principles. Selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty and leadership. The Prime Minister has spent the week ticking them off on his don't-do list. At the same time, he tries to play down allegations of saying, let the bodies pile high. Given that the sole judge on questions relating to the conduct of ministers and the conduct of the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister himself, what happens when a Prime Minister goes rogue?
Mr. Speaker, the people of this country have a chance to make their own minds up on May the 6th. And when they look at what's happening in Wales, Mr. Speaker, they have a chance to make a choice between what I'm afraid, a continually failing Welsh Labour government or Welsh Conservative administration in Cardiff that I believe has a fantastic vision. 65,000 high-skilled, high-paid jobs, finally addressing the problems of the A55, getting 5,000 more teachers, 3,000 more nurses into the Welsh NHS, solving the problems of the M4, which I've spoken about so movingly many times in this chamber before, Mr. Speaker. I hope that people will avoid voting for Plaid Cymru and that they will vote for Welsh Conservatives on May the 6th in Wales.
Duncan Baker.
Mr. Speaker, as probably the only former sub-postmaster in Parliament. Last Friday's ruling was the beginning, not the end. Yes, it will cost a lot of money, and yes, it would take time, and there is more compensation that is needed. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that only a proper judge-led public inquiry can really bring justice to those victims of this horrendous accounting scandal, and also hold to account those involved behind the scenes?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his expertise in this matter, and thank him for what he has just said, because he's totally right. I think that what happened to those post office workers, the postmasters, the sub-postmasters, was appalling. It was one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in our history, Mr. Speaker, and we are looking indeed at the issues involved, and the former High Court Judge Sir Win Williams will be making recommendations about what further actions, what further apologies we need to make.
Let's go to Howell Williams. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The PM just raised the matter of the Welsh general election. Well, in March last year, this United Kingdom Conservative government intercepted a deal between Wales and the Roche Pharmaceutical Company for 5,000 daily COVID tests, instructing the company to reserve all additional COVID tests to England. Those tests would have been crucial to saving thousands of lives in Wales. So, as we go to the polls next week, will the Prime Minister tell us why Welsh lives meant so little to him?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the honourable gentleman is completely wrong in what he says about tests, but I can tell him that he's right about one thing, which is that Wales has made an amazing contribution to our UK fight back against COVID. And it was incredible to go to the Wockhardt factory in Wrexham, to go to that site. And it's Wockhardt working together with Oxford Biomedica that has enabled us to roll out the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Mr. Speaker, that has made such a difference. And I want to say a massive thank you again to those Welsh scientists, all those people working in that factory, because they have helped to save countless lives across the UK.
Laura Ferris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The integrated review confirms the vital role the atomic weapons establishment in Berkshire will play in our future nuclear capability. I want to pay tribute to them, and particularly to the senior female employees who have won a slew of national awards for their work in defence, science, engineering and nuclear security. Given the government's significant investment in all these sectors, would my right honourable friend say how he plans to improve women's participation in these fields, where they've been historically underrepresented, and could I invite him to the AWE to illustrate our success?
Yes. I would be honoured to take up her invitation as soon as I can. In terms of the female representation in that sector, she should, of course, knows that Alison Atkinson became the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of AWE in May 2020, and there are huge numbers of opportunities for women to join our armed services, thanks, Mr. Speaker, above all, to the biggest uplift in defence spending since the end of the Cold War.
Let's go to Sarah Upholney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment last week to include aviation and shipping into our target emissions. But surely the Prime Minister knows that we will miss this target if we proceed with a third runway at Heathrow. And furthermore, that would undermine the progress that this government hopes to make towards net zero. So will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to commit to amending the airport's national policy statement in light of these commitments?
Mr. Speaker, the third runway at Heathrow is, as she knows, a private sector venture. It's up to them to produce the capital to do it. I don't see any immediate sign of that particular project coming off. I think what we should be looking at instead, and what we are looking at, is the prospect of jet zero aviation, Mr. Speaker, of flying without carbon emissions, or with far lower carbon emissions. And it is in that area that the Department of the Bays and DFT are working together with the manufacturers so that this country leads in guilt-free flying.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Right now, in every part of the country, levels of business optimism are higher than they have been since the start of the pandemic, with many firms planning to hire more staff and create more apprenticeships for our young people. And there's one factor, more than anything else, that underpins that optimism, and that is the success of the UK vaccination programme. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that there's never been a more important moment for voters in Scotland and in Wales to reject the negativity and the divisiveness of the nationalists and instead look forward to a brighter and stronger future as one united kingdom?
Absolutely. I don't know why the shadow leader's PPS is shaking her head, because surely she would agree with that. We want to work together across the whole of the UK, and I pay tribute to, as I have just said, to the incredible work of the Whatcart factory in Wales, but there's also the Valneva factory in Scotland, and the whole of the United Kingdom coming together, represented by our armed services and above all by our NHS, helping to deliver that vaccine rollout to protect the country and take it forward.
Let's go to Janet Davey. Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is absolutely shocking that we have heard the Electoral Commission is investigating funding of the Prime Minister's Downing Street flat, saying there are reasonable grounds to suspect an offence. Why does the Prime Minister think all of these stories about sleaze, corruption and dishonesty keep happening to him and his Conservative government?
I tell you what, Mr. Speaker, I think it's because people are absolutely determined to find anything they can hang on to talk about, except the vaccine rollout, except our plans to unite and level up across the country, except our plans to fight crime and give people the opportunity to buy their own homes, because they don't want to discuss those issues, because they can't win on those issues, Mr. Speaker, because they've got absolutely nothing to say. And that's what's become clear over the last year.
Let's go to Nick Fletcher. Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I ask my question, may I first ask the Prime Minister to join me in thanking all the staff at Doncaster Royal Infirmary and the emergency services for dealing swiftly with a major water leak yesterday. Fortunately, no one was hurt and all patients have been moved safely to other wards. However, back to my original question, the local elections are only days away. I would therefore like to ask the Prime Minister if he would offer his full support to Doncaster Conservative mayoral candidate James Hart. James, like me, is a local businessman and will shout up for our town and work closely with me on delivering the government's levelling up agenda.
Minister.
Well, look, my honourable friend is absolutely right. First of all, hang on, he's right, Mr. Speaker, to want to thank all the staff of Doncaster Royal Infirmary for what they did for the emergency services in dealing with the incident last night. And I'm glad to take that opportunity. But I'm also glad to take the opportunity to support him in his campaign for James Hart. And I do hope that the people of Doncaster will go out to vote and support him on May the 6th.
Let's come to Christian Matheson.
Speaker, the Prime Minister promised in a series of texts to fix a tax issue for his mate Sir James Dyson. At that dispatch box last week, he promised to publish those texts, but of course he's not made good on that promise. So when will he publish them?
Mr. Speaker, I promised to publish the account of my dealings with James Dyson, which is exactly what I have done. And I can't believe they don't learn their lesson, Mr. Speaker. They attacked the government for having any kind of discussions with a British ventilator maker last week, or potential ventilator maker last week, and then the following day they did a U-turn and said that any Prime Minister would do it, and they've now done a double U-turn, Mr. Speaker, and they're trying to bash me again. Which is it? Do you believe the government should be supporting British manufacturing delivering ventilators? Yes or no? That's the question for Labour.
Let's go to Dr. Luke Evans. Luke.
Mr. Speaker, my constituency is best for Battle of Bosworth, but we also have many other attractions like Twycross Zoo, Mallory Racecourse, Burbage Common and Thornton Reservoir. Now, these attractions all support superb cafes and pubs. With the bank holiday weekend coming up, does the Prime Minister have any plans? Does he want to pop up to Bosworth? But more importantly, what is the government doing to support these attractions and domestic tourism as we go into the summer?
I want to thank my honourable friend. I want to tell him that no matter how many pints I joined him in lifting in the pubs of Bosworth, but it could not do as much for the economy of Bosworth as what we're already doing with the £56 million Welcome Back Fund, probably even more welcome than my presence in Bosworth. I venture to suggest, that, hotly contested perhaps, and that we've extended the cut in VAT for tourism and hospitality to 5% right the way through till the end of September.
Let's go to Lillian Greenwood. Lillian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the truth behind all of this, the sleaze, the scandals, the jobs for your mates, the cash for curtains, that the Prime Minister thinks that rules, laws and decency are for other people? The sort of people who shop at John Lewis or IKEA or Argos, who don't have wealthy donors to fund their lifestyle, not for people like him and his ministers.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think what people think is that the Labour Party are losing all the arguments across British politics. They've got nothing to say. They've got no plan for our future and no vision for our country. They see a Conservative government that is getting on with uniting and levelling up with the most ambitious agenda any government has had for generations. And I think that's what they're listening to.
Let's go to Ben Bradley. Ben.
Prime Minister, next week residents here in Nottinghamshire will go out to vote for the first time since that incredibly successful 2019 election, where they elected a full slate of Conservative MPs across every constituency in this county. Despite that success, many areas like Mansfield and much of the new Blue Wall across the Midlands and North will still have mainly Labour councillors at a local level. Does my right honourable friend have a message for Nottinghamshire voters who have the opportunity next week to elect a Conservative local team that can work with our MPs to deliver for Nottinghamshire?
I do, and I want to thank him for all the wonderful work that he does for his constituency. My message would be, yes, I hope that people of Nottinghamshire will get out and vote Conservative, because it's we who share your priorities on crime, on the NHS, on investment in infrastructure and on levelling up across our country. So I hope you will vote Conservative on May the 6th.
Right, let us go to Rachel Hopkins. Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When was the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff first made aware of the plan for a European Super League?
Prime Minister.
I first was made aware of the plan for a European Super League on, I think, the Sunday night, and we acted decisively, using the arsenal of legislative freedoms that we now have, thanks to leaving the European Union, which he opposed. Of course, we acted decisively to make clear that the UK government took a dim view of this matter, Mr. Speaker, and the same goes for my Chief of Staff.
Siobhan Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Stroud recently won the Best Place to Live, and there is much to visit there, including a historic lamp standard that was erected to celebrate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And next year, our own Queen will mark her succession to the throne of 70 years. And I would ask the Prime Minister, will he join me in supporting the gift being proposed by Parliament to mark Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee?
I want to thank my honourable friend for a wonderful proposal, and I would certainly encourage all colleagues to support and to contribute to her project.
We're now going to go back to Andrea Jenkins. Andrea.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next week we will elect our first mayor of West Yorkshire. Now, does the Prime Minister agree with me that for far too long Labour have taken our northern heartlands for granted? On Thursday, the 6th of May, we'll have the opportunity to elect patriotic, hard-working northerners like Matt Robinson, Ben Houchin and Jill Mortimer in Hartlepool. They will be strong voices and champions for infrastructure and housing and jobs. We must seize this chance to build back better after the pandemic, and that only the Conservatives will deliver on this.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they don't like that sort of thing, do they? They don't like focusing. They don't like focusing on the issues that actually matter to the British people and the people of West Yorkshire. I thank my honourable friend. She's absolutely right. I hope they will go. The people on May the 6th will get out and vote for a party that believes in supporting our NHS, that believes in fighting crime, not being soft on crime, and that will bring jobs and regeneration across the entire country. And I hope that they will vote Conservative on May the 6th.
Order. I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements for the next business.